Ray, what a pleasure to see you.
So good to see you again.
One of the times for the Chinese premier to interact with the OD international community, including 800 global CEOs, I really wonder what is the nature of curiosity these days from the business community about China, for example, reflected in your work?
Of course, there's been changes in China in a way where the business community is concerned about the conflict between the United States and China. And I would say that last March it reached its worst point. That was a terrible, terrible time. And it's made improvements since then. In other words, both sides recognizing that a terrible economic war or a terrible military war would be terrible. And so that there's now a better amount of talking. And I think it'll be important for the world to hear him, and then also to continue to paint the picture of China's role in the world as a peaceful, productive party in the world.
Do you think people will be convinced?
I think actions will be important over a period of time. People, I think, sometimes come with their stereotypes. They don't know China well. I've been lucky. I've been going since 1984, so I know China pretty well. But still there are questions. So I think over a period of time, it's more a matter of the actions that are taken.
Now, since the meeting between the two presidents in San Francisco last year, we see both sides have drawn up some specific to-do list, and they're trying to deliver. So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Yeah. However, this is an interesting year, 2024. You have in the United States one of the most eye-catching elections, and you have in China an economic transformation where people are asking about the economic growth. So how do you see these two events in two very different countries working on the bilateral relations?
I believe the elections in the United States are one of the greatest risks for the world because the United States is internally having a great conflict between values, and that's brought about populism, and there's a rather extremism that's operating there, so that neither side will accept losing or subjugating themselves to the other side. This election is going to be a question for democracy. Can democracy work it out? Can the United States work together, or will the factions break it apart?
And for China, of course, as I mentioned, there's an economic transition, to put it into a diplomatic phrase. So how do you see the adjustment of its economic potential is now working on the relationship between China and the United States?
There is an immediate problem that has taken place because of the real estate problem, caring to the local government, financial problem. Those problems are manageable if managed well. There might be forms of restructuring, they need monetary policy and the like. They have an effect on people's attitudes, their willingness to spend money and so on. That's, of course, an issue. And then there's the international issue. International conflict with the United States. The problem with that is also a problem from the U.S. perspective. Foreign investors or foreign companies worry about being sanctioned in China. So it might be actions that could come from either the U.S. side or can come from the Chinese side. And then there's still the remarkable development of Chinese technologies and Chinese productions. Look at the leadership that's taking place in wind and electric vehicles, and even the development of the chip race. You know, that's an American-Chinese competition, and it's really quite remarkable how effective that is. But of course, that also, in the competitor's view, represents a risk. So you look at marketplaces, Europe, will electric vehicles, what will the roles be, and so on. So those competitions are going on, and how they're handled, I think, will be really important.
Now, China has been focusing on the so-called four news. As you know, new infrastructure, new energy, new technology, and also new consumption. Chinese like to come up with these PowerPoints. But how do you see these directions likely to drive the growth of the economy, which is very, very critical right now?
Internally, there's also, of course, the dual circulation concept.
Yeah.
And so there's the external and there's the internal. I think internally, entrepreneurship, the ability to tap individuals and come up with that creativity to invent and to be able to resource them with capital is a very, very, very powerful vehicle in this competition. So I think it'll be very important that there's that support of the new types of things that are going on that you mentioned, and also then the dealing with the old issues to deal with the real estate, the debt restructurings, and all of those. I think that those are important. So I would say in China, there are issues that you have to do the debt restructuring. There's a deflationary force that needs to be dealt with through some form of a combination of restructuring and then getting the monetary policy right. It can be managed. The other more important question is the direction of how do you value those incentives of the market.
We see the entrepreneurs that have been the most evident on the international stage over the past 15 years, let's just say. You see there's a generational change that's taking place. We haven't known the newest names yet. They're not visible on the international stage yet, but there is a generational change. Meanwhile, you see Chinese companies are getting ever more global, given the circumstances they're facing in different parts of the world, including back at home. So how do you see these elements, given your observation, are working into this transformation as we speak?
I think the idea of a dialectic, when things are at odds, and that creating the energy for making the movement forward is so apt now. I think that there most likely will be these tensions and these trade-offs that are going to have to be made. But I think the Chinese force, in terms of the power, the development, is going to remain a great force in the development of China. And I think in both countries, what's most paramount importance is how they operate with their people to be strong and productive.
Now, China has been able to improve because its interactions opening door with the rest of the world 40 years. But we can see that period of time compared to the industrializations and stuff over the past few hundred years in the West is a very short period of time. So we're seeing hundreds of years of things taking place within a few decades. How do you see these timelines actually are creating confusions and wow factor? How do you see this double sword in a way?
I think that there were some bubbles created. Real estate was, and I think it's healthy to get rid of those bubbles. And I've gone through 4 major comparable crises in the United States, and I assure you they're all manageable. I think the question is the interactions with the rest of the world, and then the question of what form of productivity. Do the incentives remain, or also, we have a problem in the United States with that we could use more common prosperity. Because, so how do you achieve the right balances between making prosperity for most people so that it elevates most people, whether that's in the United States or whether it's in China? To be productive is essential, and then to have people work together and have those relationships that rather than fight with each other. And that's the challenge.
That should be the right competition.
That has to be the right competition. That equal opportunity, that you strive for equal opportunity, and broad-based benefits. Both countries, I think that this is going to be a very key element in the success of either country. Because if that's not achieved, you won't have broad-based productivity and broad-based support. And without that, I don't think you'll be successful. For both countries, it's be strong and be productive for most people, I think.
Amid the snow-capped mountains, they come together to rebuild trust in a fractured world. I am here too, bringing to you all the discussions about the world's intertwined challenges, and more importantly, reporting on efforts to find solutions, among which China is a critical player. Join me for key updates and exclusive interviews from Davos at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. Now, you hosted earlier an interaction with Mr. Liu Jianchao, one of the very prominent Chinese ministers of the Chinese Communist Party. And I'm sure you have, with that closed-door session, interacted about Chinese diplomacy, the goals of diplomacy, vis-a-vis economic development. Tell me more about what is the takeaway from that meeting. How is it interact with what you just explained to me and analyzed about U.S.-China?
The main thing that he and I were both hoping to accomplish is to create a mutual understanding. That doesn't mean an agreement about what should be, but to try to eliminate misunderstandings, because they're very dangerous. And he was remarkable in being able to be so open. He said, give me your toughest questions, whatever they might be. Let's discuss any of them. And he was really remarkable in having those exchanges. I think there are questions. They may seem impolite, but if the United States, if he asks the United States, how could we trust in the stability of our relationship when the politics is so volatile? Okay, questions that, and then back and forth in terms of those delicate questions. That is really bringing about an understanding. So that was something I was very, very pleased to see. He made a big impression in the United States.
Quality communications, so crucial these days.
Seeing it through the other's eyes. Not seeing it through one's own eyes, which could be biased. And then agreeing that there are certain terrible things that must not happen.
What might be your concern for the next biggest challenge as you see today?
Well, as I say, when I combine the risk of the internal conflict in the United States with the risk of the external conflict, that opens all sorts of types of economic risks as well as political. The costs of war, the United States being overextended in some places, and how that works out. Spreading of war in the Middle East, spreading of war in other places that create great disruptions. And then, of course, we have this climate issue, which is going to be very costly. If you just spent the money, it's on it, estimated $5 trillion a year, 5% of world GDP. I think in 24, it's that confluence. And then red lines. We're so close to red lines. Let's say if we were to take the Taiwan issue, okay, we're very close to red lines with the Taiwan issue. We're close to red lines in a number of areas. What does the chip war look like? How do sanctions work? All of those. So it's dangerously close to those red lines. I think wisdom will prevail, but this is an environment where accidents also could happen.
What would be the best advice?
Yeah, the mutual understanding and being realistic. You know, Chinese concept of war, since The Art of War was written, is that you should never win a war through military fighting because that's so painful, and you must not have been clever enough to win the war through military destructive. I would say if we take that kind of war, or if we take a terrible economic war, and we realize that we should be clever to be able to compete intensely.
Technology is an interesting factor. As we know, this year's annual meeting focused so much on artificial intelligence. This is also a competition we see between China and the United States. Now, how do you see these technology factors, especially artificial intelligence, likely to play here? On the one hand, we already see the two sides come up with some kind of interactions, discussing governance issue regarding to artificial intelligence. On the other hand, we are likely to see a competition between the two sides already taking place. So how do you see this mixed picture is going to also contribute to reshape what you just described?
Well, throughout history, we've seen whoever wins the technology war wins the economic war and wins the military war. So from both sides, it's very, very important that they do the best to win. They also recognize the threats that might come from those technologies. So in an ideal world, you'd have cooperation, but that reality prevails. So now what you're seeing is that a chess game playing.
Yes.
What technology and who, and will I prevent it, and what will I mean for the countries that are in between? Will they be able to use it, and what sanctions will develop, and so on? And then how do they get around those sanctions? And then so you see it where, let's say, Chinese companies will then go set up companies that are not Chinese companies, not run by Chinese, and then they'll compete, and so on. I think in this world today, it's very difficult to control all of those things. But that's the nature of what the war is like.
Mm-hmm. Now, the technology also related to people's understanding of each other, because as we know, rhetorics and narratives goes with these echo chambers, totally totally energized by new technologies. How do you see these elements once again working in the overall discussion?
But I think that brings us back to this energy of entrepreneurship. You know, okay, it's man's inventiveness, right? Educate your people well, make them civil, and let them work well together, and enable them with capital so that enables them to be creative and be effective. Yeah. And so I think we come down to those basic fundamentals for both countries. Those are the elements of competition that matter the most.
And also, what has been China's biggest contribution to the world over the past few decades when you observe China? What could be the biggest contribution China can make in the next years that, as you see?
I think the greatest contribution in the world, without a doubt, was the efficient production of a lot of things that created incomes for people who enjoyed the benefits of those incomes, and also created products which were cost effective. So that was the contribution. In terms of your question about the future, I think the view of China, as has been stated and actually demonstrated in history, that's an extension of a Confucian view, which is that how to have harmony and how to not have the conflict and to have effective competition. Something even geopolitically like the tribute system, in a sense where there's the opportunity to be able to do this in a way that doesn't produce the great conflicts. I think that would be a great contribution. Yeah. There's a different view about war, for example, and war is our biggest threat. Yeah. So contributions as to how we could work this out together would be great.
Mm. Last question about you. You have been, over the years, especially on China-U.S. relations, being the vocal minority. How do you see can be the role of you to wake up those unvocal majorities?
I think people are sometimes too vocal in saying, I believe this is right and that's right. And I think it's not so much to take sides. One shouldn't take sides. One should understand instead the mechanics of how things work, and then understand how each side is taking advantage of their opportunities, and then working in a way so that that can be done to produce the best outcome for the whole. So I would expect that I'm not taking sides. I've come to understand the benefits and some of the problems that China faces, and I work for that better good of the interaction so there could be learnings and appreciations. There's so much in the Chinese culture that we could learn about. It's such a great culture. To learn about and consider it doesn't mean to accept that alternative way of life.
Ray, what a pleasure seeing you here.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.